Okay, this video is a book review, and the name of the book is right here, How Catholic Art Saved the Faith. The author's name is Liz Lev. Subtitle, The Triumph of Beauty and Truth in the Counter-Reformation Art. Okay, so she's a tour guide of art museums like in Rome, Italy, and the Vatican and stuff. The book has a paperback version, which I read first and I enjoyed. Then I listened to the audio CD version in the car. You know, I'm a big fan of Christian art. I love it. Okay, so let's see. She goes over the history of the Protestant Reformation, the Catholic Counter-Reformation, or Restoration, you might call it, and talks about a lot of the differences and how that basically the Catholic Church saw that art was one of its greatest skills, and it popularized this greatly during the Catholic Restoration. And Catholic art and traditions, a lot of it comes out of the history of the ancient Greeks. You know, George Whitehead had said that all the philosophy is a footnote to Plato, and others had said that the Catholic religion to some extent is, you know, and Nietzsche had said this as well, was sort of Platonism for the masses, okay? You know, Schopenhauer had talked about religion being metaphysics for the masses. Okay, some of the nice things about Catholicism, there's lots of community. It's like designed to make the community spend time together. There's saints' days, and these are saint feast days. These would be like the holidays in a Catholic country, if you will. And then there's lots of educational art, because all these traditional communities were illiterate. So all the paintings in the Catholic churches were there to teach the illiterate peasants, you know, the Bible. They couldn't read it. They could just hear the sermons and look at the paintings. You know, for more smarter persons, or more or less, I shouldn't use the word smarter, you know, literate persons, the art and all this other stuff in the history and philosophy, it's amazing. It's great stuff. I love all this stuff. Okay, the painters were in competition with each other. Each one wanted to produce a better masterpiece, you know, and then to be able to do something at the Vatican or some of these other famous cathedrals. Catholic cathedrals are by far the best, okay, and the best ones are in France. Very Catholic country in those days. Let's see. Catholic art brings people to faith by its beauty, its goodness, its love, rather than the Protestantism tends to overemphasize, do what we say or you're going to end up in hell. It's much more negative. Here's some quotes by George Santayana, a Catholic philosopher. He said, "The Roman Catholic Church has much in common with Greek paganism. Christianity arose out of Greek theology and Old Testament morality. The Greek theology predominated in Catholicism, whereas the Catholic Church has much in common with Greek paganism. Old Testament morality predominated in Protestantism. The Catholics had a Renaissance. The Protestants had a Reformation." I'm going to show a bunch of nice paintings related to this talk. So first of all, I'll just show Luther. So Luther was a real hothead. You know, Will Durant, the historian, said he was the most vituperative religious author who ever lived. He was a major hothead. He was very entertaining, though. And so here's a typical quote by Luther. "A peasant with scripture knows more than the Pope without it." You know, I jokingly paraphrase that. A health coach with a low-fat vegan diet can cure more people than the head of Harvard Hospital without it, which is true. Okay. You know, and a lot of people have sort of noticed this big difference between Protestantism versus Catholicism. And there was a story in The Simpsons, you know, cartoon show, where Marge died and she went to heaven, but she accidentally, by mistake, got sent to Protestant heaven, and then she looked over into another cloud, and there was Catholic heaven, and the Protestant heaven was kind of boring and stuck up, and the Catholic heaven was all kinds of fun. The Mexicans are dancing, the Italians are drinking wine, the Irish are getting drunk, and a whole bunch of other funny things, and she wanted to be with Homer and Bart in Catholic heaven. Okay, now here's some of the other big major differences. In Catholicism, you sort of got this big tent, if you will, that includes everybody and almost everything. All right, there's the idea of the saints, the great role models for other Catholics. You know, you don't. If you ask a psychologist what's a good life and a good person, you know, they'll give you some muffled answer. They don't even know right from wrong, left from right, a man from a woman. If you ask a Catholic what's a good person, they'll just name, you know, Jesus Christ and Mary and all the saints, okay, and Joseph. It's obvious, okay? And, you know, the idea of a relic. Yeah, sure there were a lot of fake relics, but something good came out of all that. In Catholicism, there's this giant tradition of pilgrimages. And that is a good thing, because when people are traveling around, and by the way, in Rome, they made a lot of effort to make Rome, like the Roman popes wanted it to be the greatest pilgrimage city in the entire world. So all kinds of effort was putting into, having a place for them to stay, having clear, safe paths for them, minimizing crime so it was safe for the pilgrims to travel. And so wherever you have pilgrims traveling, you've got people from other countries meeting each other, making friends with each other, and you've got a high level of safety efforts being put into those travel routes. And that's all a good thing. So it generates safety, it generates travel between communities and sharing and communication, and it generates economic trade. It was a great source of wealth for the places along the path, okay? Another unique thing about Catholicism is the Virgin Mary. The Virgin Mary is very much celebrated as a saint in the church. And other women are also very celebrated in the Catholic Church. Mary Magdalene is the penitent Magdalene who formerly was a prostitute. There's some controversy about that, but there's always controversy about everything. For the most part, she was considered a reformed prostitute and a great example of a reformed woman to all the other women. Okay, and then the Catholic Church has all the angels in a lot of the paintings and stuff, and St. Thomas Aquinas even classified the different orders of angels and whatnot. And Catholicism is full of beautiful little things like that, okay? And now other people say, well, you shouldn't worship anybody but God, otherwise that's wrong, or paganism. The Catholics only worship God, okay? But if you pray to a saint, the idea is not that you worship the saint. The idea is that the saint maybe knows somebody higher up in the religious game and can maybe go ask you a favor for you. And the gist of it is that if the saint can't come through for you or doesn't listen to your prayer, the idea is that, well, you can pray to some other saint, versus if you pray to God, you don't get your request answered, then you feel like, man, you're really screwed, because if God don't want it, that's the end of the line. You're not going to get what you're praying for. So that's kind of what it's all about. Catholic painting and sculpture is just magnificent, by far the best of anything else. And also, I really don't like this multicultural stuff. It's so ridiculous. There is no competition with Catholic art except Protestant art. Go all over the world. Put it in the comments down below. But I think that's important, because once people start thinking in the modern way, they just become hopelessly stupid. Okay, everything has its strengths and weaknesses. Okay, and so one of the great strengths of Catholicism is incredible art. And also it has an incredible sense of life. That's just a wonderful thing that totally supports the family. Okay, Michelangelo, for example, was a member of the Franciscans, and she makes the point that the Renaissance artists were much, much more religious than is widely taught nowadays. Nowadays, they try to distort everything and act like the Renaissance artists and other Catholics were not that religious. Just for a little perspective, Botticelli, Botticelli and Van der Weyden were the two greatest artists, Catholic artists of the 1400s. And, Botticelli was so taken by the Florentine preacher Savonarola that he actually started destroying his paintings, which is insane. One of the greatest painters of all time. But the point I'm making is that's how religious and almost fanatical they were, many of them, about religion. That's Botticelli, okay, one of the greatest artists who ever lived. And he was so taken up by Savonarola. You remember the bonfire of the vanities, all his vanity. So I don't like that Savonarola stuff. He kind of reminds me of a Protestant, okay? But I'm showing you that was the way they actually thought. And Michelangelo also had, some of this like almost medieval theology type thought. He loved to read Dante over and over. Okay, the Protestants would also criticize purgatory and say, oh no, we don't think purgatory is actually a real thing, etc. And of course there's the issue of the Pope. What the Catholics will say is, well, look, Catholicism goes back to Christ, and St. Peter was the first Pope, the rock upon which he shall build the church, okay? The Bible was, collated by the Catholics. It was written by Catholics, collated by the Catholics. And the Catholics began modern Christian music. But of course the Protestants are great at music. They got Bach and Handel and a whole bunch of other awesome composers. The modern scientific method of a hypothesis, experiment, etc., refinement of the data, repeat experiment, that came out of Catholicism, of course. I talked about that in a recent lecture, and I actually made another entire lecture on that subject. Another anonymous quote is, Christ and the saints and art are the greatest apologetics for our faith. And I kind of agree with that to a large extent. What I mean by that is, I've read all the religious, not all of it, but I've read tons of all this religious dogma stuff and doctrine stuff, different translations of the Bible, different commentaries on the Bible. And, I prefer Pascal. You can only go so far about that stuff, and who cares about all these little technical details? They don't really matter. The big stuff is the important stuff, you know. Be nice to each other, help each other, all that stuff, what Christ did and said. You know, that's relevant, okay? How to live your life and get along with people. But, you know, fussing over doctrine, I could care less about all that. And I don't think that gets you anywhere. So that's kind of why I tend to focus on all this stuff. Yeah, if you ever want to read about the doctrine and the life of Christ, the best book to read is The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel. It's the best of the apologetics books. I've read a whole bunch of them. Okay, it's short, it's fast, it's quick, it's entertaining. There's an audio version and there's a movie version. So if you want that kind of stuff, that's the best place to start. Okay, as far as Protestants, they basically criticize all this stuff. They don't want any saints. They don't want Virgin Mary to be worshipped at all. And she's not worshipped. She's just prayed to in the sense of indirect for intercession with Christ, okay? People are a little scared of, you know, God the Father and to some extent Christ as well, some people. And, you know, the Holy Ghost is almost like the philosophical version of God. All right, so, you know, like I said, Martin Luther killed the Renaissance, according to Durant, the historian, Nietzsche, and others. The Protestants smashed the sculpture in the Catholic churches. They destroyed the paintings. They slashed them to pieces. Masterpiece paintings. They broke the stained glass windows of the Catholic churches. The Protestants in Ireland, they would throw the Celtic crosses into the sea. They would hang the Catholic priests. The RAP, I don't want to say this word out loud here, the nuns during the sack of Rome, for example. And it's been said that Protestantism takes most of the fun out of Christianity, and I would agree with that. Alfred North Whitehead said, "The Protestant Reformation was one of the most colossal failures in history. It threw overboard that which makes the church tolerable, even gracious, its aesthetic appeal, but it kept its barbarous theology." Okay. Carl Jung was disenchanted by the bleakness of Protestantism. All you got to do is go inside a Catholic church, go inside a Protestant church, and you'll see the difference. Inside the Catholic church, there's all these beautiful statues, all these beautiful paintings, all these bright lights and the stained glass windows. It's just beautiful. You go to a Protestant church, and it's just sort of, in comparison, quite boring. I mean, there's still some beautiful buildings, St. Paul's Cathedral in London, you know, but they're boring compared to the Catholic church, okay? And I think it was... you know, Pugin was the English Catholic, you know, part of the Catholic revival, Catholic Renaissance in the mid-1800s in England. He said, everything beautiful and gracious in a church is Catholic. Everything boring and ugly and vulgar is Protestant. And there's a lot of truth in that statement. Protestantism just keeps breaking up into new sects ad infinitum, and it's just so you end up, you know, there's only one Catholic church. There's only been one Catholic church since Christ and the first Pope, St. Peter, versus there's many thousands of versions of Protestantism. Okay. And like I said, I think all Christians should just get along and don't fuss over the details, but for what it's worth, I'm just sharing with you this history, okay? So here's the Sistine Madonna and Child, and I know a lady doctor who looks exactly like this lady. It's just beautiful, though. You know, there's Mary, Queen of Heaven. You know, there's the blue, Queen of Heaven, the red, the sadness of the future of Christ. These little angels at the bottom are the ones that end up on the cover of a Van Halen album. This is the Putti. This is Raphael's painting from 1512. And it's just beautiful. Okay, here's another Mary, Queen of the Angels in Heaven. And so one of the things you'll notice if you study religion history is the Catholic Church has the highest exaltation of women, okay? And I can tell you, my mother was the queen of the family. My mom was revered in the family, okay? And Catholicism celebrates women. It really does, in a big, big way. Whereas the Protestants, even, you know, C.S. Lewis, the famous Christian who wrote Mere Christianity, would make fun of the idea of Catholics being so, you know, enthusiastic about Mary. They name all these places, you know, the church Mary, Mary this, Mary that. Okay. The Holy Family, it's Catholicism, Christianity is totally about family. Totally. It's the center of everything. Look at the modern culture. Modern culture celebrates abortion, okay? Catholic Church celebrates the birth of a baby. They're like opposites, okay? And that's not by accident, because one is be fruitful and multiply and celebrate life and your family and all this other stuff. The other one is the opposite. Please go extinct at the request of the elites who run everything. Okay, so here's a George Santayana quote. Family is one of nature's masterpieces. And Aristotle had said basically the same thing. The family is the way that humans meet their needs, okay? Family is a great thing, you know, and it really helps. The women always pretty much end up running the family, almost always. So it's important that the woman wants to do it and is able to do it well, because it makes everything good. What I had noticed was my mom was always happy and made everything great for everybody. There are a lot of the younger wives that are now sort of middle-aged to just getting into elderly. They're kind of a little bit grouchy and bitter by far in comparison to my mom. And I think the reason is they're tired. They're kind of overworked. No one else cares about the house except for them. So they come home after they worked all day. Now they got to do the house. And there's a lot of things to that. Partly maybe it's because the economy's not so good, but sometimes too it's because they value working over spending time at home. Like my wife, for example, I told her, look, I'm happy to pay for all the bills. I got plenty of money. You can stay home. You don't need to work at all. She's like, no way. I get all my education and I'm going to work. And I'm like, well, okay, go ahead. But she really didn't need to. And the funny thing, too, is we'd be better off if she hadn't. But that's a long story. We're not going to get into that. All right, now here is Christ's Sermon on the Mount by Karl Bloch. He's a great painter, this Karl Bloch. This is from 1877. And even Hannah Arendt, she's a famous writer of history, she said that the big thing that Jesus of Nazareth brought into cultural ethics and philosophy was an emphasis on the idea of forgiveness. So Christianity sort of makes things okay. It enables people to get along with each other. Because if you go into some of the Old Testament morality of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, you just end up with never-ending Hatfields and McCoys, okay? Endless conflicts. Whereas Christ would say, he didn't say keep on sinning. Like he said to the woman caught in adultery, he says, go and sin no more. Stop being a jerk, be nice, get along. And there's a potential for everybody to be able to get along and work with each other. It's not a coincidence that everybody wants to move to Christian countries and just about nobody wants to move to non-Christian countries. I mean, that's like just the way it is and for a reason. Another thing, too, here's another example. This is Christ and the Good Thief, a painting by Titian, 1566, at the time of the sort of Counter-Reformation. And here's the good thief on the cross sort of requesting forgiveness by Christ, and Christ forgives him. And that's a big point of Christianity, that up until the last moment that you're alive, you can declare yourself to be a Christian. Anybody can join. It's the most tolerant, open thing in the whole world. But that idea of there's always a chance to redeem yourself is one of the great things about Christianity and one of the unique things about Christianity. Okay, here's a magnificent painting. This is by Rogier van der Weyden. So him and Botticelli were the two greatest artists of the 1400s. And this painting, it's just spectacular. The more you look at it, the better it gets. You can guess who it was funded by. A lot of times the guilds would fund paintings, okay, for a contest or for a church, a cathedral. And this, of course, was funded by the Archers Guild. And you can see how the body of Christ and the way his arms are, it's like a bow, as funded by the Archers Guild. You can see how Mary's position echoes his. Okay, so it's magnificent. It's like he's drawing back the legs as if he's drawing back the bow. And there's Mary Magdalene, very sad. Everybody's very sad, of course, as they're bringing Christ down from the cross. Spectacular painting here. I love this painting. I have a copy of that on the wall in my bathroom. Okay, and then here is Mary Magdalene. And Mary Magdalene, the reformed prostitute, was a great example of someone who turned her life around. Christ helps all who ask. If you look at Alcoholics Anonymous, the persons who, declare themselves to Christ, born-again Christian, they have far, far better outcomes than the other patients, okay? And Christianity says anybody who wants to can turn their life around. Accept Christianity and devote yourself to being good. Find your own path to what you can do to make the world a better place, okay? And if you look at a lot of these modern other cultures like PC, it has zero tolerance for anybody who disagrees with them, okay? And that's terrible. Christianity disagrees with tons of things that people do, but it gives everybody a chance to redeem themselves, however late the hour, like for the good thief. So here's Mary Magdalene at the foot of the cross. This one is by Hayes, the artist, and it's just beautiful. And you kind of get this sense of it's always okay. The skull at the foot of the cross sort of symbolizes Adam, and that Jesus is the new Adam, that mankind has been saved. It's beautiful all around, that there's always hope and there's always a chance to turn things around in Christianity, and that's a great thing about it, one of the great things about it. And penitent Mary Magdalene was sort of what we would think of in the modern world as like a celebrity or something. She was a big celebrity, if you will, in the Catholic Church. And, from the side of the female, it was that any woman who wanted to could turn her life around. And this is the Penitent Mary Magdalene, painted by Tintoretto, 1598, again, part of the Catholic Restoration. And there were a lot of places where they would call themselves the Mary Magdalene Center, and it was a place for women who had, been in prostitution or had some other problem in their life where they could turn their life around, have a place to live and turn themselves around and, have somebody feed them and shelter them until they could get their act together, which is a great thing. And, the Catholic Church and the other churches, they were able to do all these things. They didn't need any external thing. They didn't need any public type of thing, based on TAXESs, okay? They were able to get it done, all right? And in a much better way. The other thing the Catholic Church celebrates, it celebrates women who devote themselves to helping other people, okay? And my mom should have been declared a saint. She was always doing stuff like this. This is, by the way, St. Catherine of Siena, Italy. And she stayed in the city to help during the plague. And, all the women were told to leave. She said, no, I will stay. And the crown of thorns is a symbol that she's a bride of Christ. And it's just beautiful. Her whole life was beautiful. Okay, here's another saint. And this is another thing I mean. One, you can, be all busy with your family. Or two, you can be a saint. Or these are just examples. You can be reformed. You can help other people. Saint Elizabeth the Hungary was the daughter of a king, and she was married with 3 kids, but she chose that she wanted to basically be a benefactress to the poor rather than be all caught up in royal duties. Okay, so, and that's the other thing too. If a woman was married and married with kids, she could still devote her life to religion. She would still have her family, but her main activity during the day would be to help the poor or whatever charity she would occupy herself with. And that's what I meant by my mom. My mom was supported by my dad financially, but man, she's on the board of directors of an orphanage. She adopted 2 girls for years and then adopted other people for lots of time, even though they would come and go as necessary, Like one of my relatives, nice lady, but she had a problem with alcoholism. When she would have trouble, my mom would take her in the house and she would detox her in our house. Stuff like that. My mom was always doing stuff like that. And so that's good. Catholicism encourages that sort of thing. She was a minister of care and all this other stuff too. Okay, the other thing too is Catholicism, a religion of poor people. Like the early Christians, it's all the poor, starving people, okay? And then you can see what Nero did. Emperor Nero, he wanted to take part of Rome and just tear down all the buildings and then rebuild things that he wanted for himself. So he caused a fire in Rome, and then this is around 64 AD, and then he burned down, that part of the city and used it for himself. Kind of reminds me of what happened in Hawaii not that long ago. Kind of reminds me of what happened in France not that long ago. Anyways, so he did all these things. And then he blamed it on the Christians, and he would use the Christians as human torches. He would light them just to create air in the streets in Rome or in his area. So this is all pretty basic history. It's good to know history. As Santayana said, if you don't know history, you're doomed to repeat it. So it's good to learn it. Another example of magnificent Catholic art, the painters would compete to see who could produce the best painting, and that's a great thing. There's competition in a good way to do something good that helps people, and it's beautiful. And I actually think on the internet right now about the doctors trying to compete to make the best lectures, the ones that are telling the truth to the public. That's a good thing because that'll generate better lectures. And people should compete about these good things, singing and teaching and studying. That's all good when it's done for truth. But anyways, they were competing for painting, and this was a flat ceiling. And look at this ceiling. This is on a flat surface. This guy, Andrea Pozzo, did an incredible job of creating the illusion of three-dimensionality. This is one of the most beautiful cathedral ceilings ever made, if not the best one. From a technical skill point of view, it's more impressive than the Sistine Chapel. This is the apotheosis of St. Ignatius. It's magnificent. Okay, another thing I like about Catholicism is it's syncretic. What syncretic means is that it learns from other cultures and it's happy to enjoy the best of other cultures. And so what I mean by that is the Renaissance Italian Catholics, they were impressed by a lot of the ideas of the Greeks, and they would celebrate them in paintings, and they're beautiful. Okay, so here is Spring, Primavera, and this was painted by Botticelli. We talked about Botticelli as being him and Van der Weyden, the greatest artists of the 1400s. This is done in 1493, and this is just sort of typical. of how great Catholic art is, Renaissance art is. It's magnificent, and the way you can enjoy it. Oh, I wanted to get the School of Athens by Raphael. I forgot that's another one of the magnificent paintings of this time. That was before the Reformation and all that business really sort of was significantly started. Now, the Creation of Adam by Michelangelo from 1512. This is the most important painting of all time. This is the, like Ayn Rand had said, art is the concretization of metaphysics. Man is created in the image of God, therefore entitled to, he's part divine as well as part beast, if you will, but he's part divine, therefore should be entitled to natural rights, privacy, free speech, and all these other things. God created man in his own image, therefore man can be a creator. And the universe is rational, therefore we should study it and learn about it, okay? And the future of the world depends on whether or not people respect this idea of man created in the image of God. We've talked about that in other lectures. And then, of course, the Last Judgment on the far wall in the Sistine Chapel is also magnificent. And there's tons more magnificent lectures. I've given a whole bunch of lectures on Christian art, Easter art, Christmas art, what is good art, all this stuff. So, anyways, I hope you enjoyed that. I think that's the last painting. The book is good. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the ideas in it. And she'll go into a lot more detail about the history and the individual artists. She really knows all the artists in quite a bit of detail. I thought it was enjoyable. Hopefully this talk in the book could be enjoyable to you if you're interested in that sort of thing.